I call the November 21st, 2019 meeting of the Grafton Mass Disability Commission to order. I will, before getting to any items of business, ask for a moment of silence for fallen Worcester Fire Department member Lieutenant Jason Menard, who died in the line of duty on November 13th, 2019. Okay. It's been a tough week, hasn't it, for the whole area, hasn't? And also praying for, is his first name Chris Pace, who's recovering from that, from his injuries, so.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, announcements. Either Daryl or I could make the announcement, doesn't matter.
Go ahead.
Okay, all right. Current Disability Commission member at large Donna Stock, or former at large member Donna Stock, was elected to the Select Board on October 29th, 2019. So the Select Board has since redesignated her as the Select Board rep to this commission, and Doreen DeFazio has stepped back as the Select Board representative. So what this does is it creates an opening on the Disability Commission, which is posted on Grafton's website. I'm hoping I'm getting this correctly. If you go on grafton-ma.gov and you go under boards and committees, there's an information section at the very bottom, and within that section, you'll see all of the listed committees and commissions in town and the process by which to apply for an opening. So this is a commission of 7 with 1 vacancy. And with that, we just had an election in town, and you want something done, you ask a busy person, okay? And both Donna Stock and Lisa Rice stepped forward to really give her their time and continue to give her their time in town. And so I personally thank both of them for their efforts, for what both of them do in town. And also currently, Lisa Rice is currently serving on the Library Planning and Building Committee. And so I'm looking forward to that accessible space in town, which is a huge footprint that they started digging this week. If you've been up there near the library, they kind of clear cutting there, or starting to build. So thank you, Donna and Lisa, for your service. Okay, next item on the agenda, personal tax exemptions. And thank you to our Grafton Principal Assessor, Mary Oliver, for coming in tonight to discuss the personal tax exemptions for real estate taxes and the various classifications and how to go about applying for them. So thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be able to come out and speak about any tax relief that we can offer any of our taxpayers. So we can start off with the real estate exemptions. We have programs available. I'll go over the eligibility and basically the requirements for each one of these categories. Our first page is a sample of all the tax relief that is available. We have these posted around the town hall, in the senior center, and you can always come to the assessor's office. And these are tax relief that we can give, and what the qualifications are, all on one sheet for you. The types of programs, an exemption. This will decrease the taxes that are owed, and it is not, you do not have to pay this back, and they must be applied for annually. So all of your exemptions, you do have to file that annually with an application to the assessor's office. A deferral, this will allow a temporary deferment of those payments until either the demise or the sale of the property. This also must be applied for annually. For our exemption program, all our exemptions have specific qualifications that must be met. These exemptions are established and the qualifications are established through Mass General Law, and they are only administered at the local level. So these are, each town individually will administer these different exemptions, whereas, so it's not at a state level. The qualifications can either be financial, residential requirements, documentation, for example, for the blind, or a service-related disability. I'm going to start with our 41C, which is our exemption for our seniors. So the first thing, qualification is you must be over 65. The requirements for this 41C program, it has to be income and asset qualified. So the applicant must be 65 by July 1st of that fiscal year. And the first year you apply, you have to submit your birth certificate. And also the other requirement would be the applicant has to have domiciled in Massachusetts for 10 years and owned and occupied the property in Massachusetts for 5 years. So you can actually rent for 5 years and live in the state for 5 years and then own the property for 5 years. So you don't have to own a property in town, in the state for 10 years, just 5 years, but you have to live in the state for 10.
Okay. And as far as the domicile, what if you have like a two-family and you are occupying one half of that? Is it applicable to just half of the property tax or the entire?
For a two-family, no, it's applicable for you own the property, you own both sides, you rent it out. So what would happen in this exemption here, we would take that rent in as income. So you might not qualify if the rent is and your income don't qualify you for this particular exemption. Whereas we have a 17D, which we'll go into later, it does not go on your income. But two-family does qualify as your domicile.
Okay.
But if you go to 3-family, 4-family, then that would actually kick you out of, you would not be able to get a 41C.
Okay, so it's mostly, it at most is a two-family.
Yeah, single and two families,
Okay.
yes. Okay. The base exemption for this is $750, and this can go up to $1,000. Because we do here in Grafton, which we had voted in, and I'll talk about that later also, that we can double most of our exemptions. This exemption here, the town had voted in, instead of starting at 500 as your minimum, we raised it to 750.
Okay.
And that was back in 2000, I believe 13 is when they made that change, so that you automatically start with $750 off.
Okay.
Okay. The other requirement for your 41C goes on your whole estate limits. So this is basically all your assets. And these assets are qualified as of July 1st of that coming fiscal year. And for a married couple, it's $55,000 in total assets. This does not include your house. Okay, that is taken out of your assets, but it will include CDs, IRAs, checking accounts, savings accounts, 401ks, stocks, bonds, annuities, boats, and RVs. And what we require for the documentation with this is like your bank statements. As of July 1st, these were your balances. Okay? And then for a single, it would be $40,000 as of July 1st, same type of assets.
Is there a look back as far as, let's say someone wanted to transfer some assets for the purposes of thus qualifying for one of these programs? Is there a look back to say, well, 2 months before applying, you moved money around or
Nope,
transferred?
it goes on, what is that balance as of July 1st?
Okay.
July 1st is the magic date for your age.
Okay.
Also, for the ownership of the home, and also for what is your balance on July 1st.
Okay.
Okay? So yeah, if you win the lottery, move it before July 1st.
I don't think you'll be worrying about $1,000,
I
need
know.
for $1,000 if that happens. So,
For the 41C, the income limits, no, these are adjusted every year by our COLA, which is the cost of living. We get that sent to us by Social Security. They send us a document if it's 2%, 2.5%. So every year we're going to adjust this limit. So for 2000, I apologize for having the wrong date in here. I believe I have the wrong date. Let me see. I should probably, yes, I do. Should be for 2020.
okay.
Yeah, I apologize.
That's okay.
The limits this year are, for a married couple, $37,137, because the Social Security deduction, which you can add on to increase your say that limit is $7,137. For the single, it's $24,758, and that is also, for either one, is adjusted by your cost of living increase. Your income, so when we look at your income, it'll be wages, social security, pensions, what monies you're getting from annuities, interest, dividends, and, for example, rent. So if you have a two-family, I need to know what you're getting for the rent, and that's part of your income.
Okay, so do they, it's sort of like, is it like an affidavit they sign that they have thus been forthcoming in forwarding all that you have requested?
Yes, when you fill out your application, I have samples of the application, but all this documentation is listed, and we're gonna get copies of your 1099s, your W-2s, and things like that. And they do sign this, stating that it's under perjury, that penalties of perjury, so
Sure.
this is everything I have, and this is what I'm using to qualify,
Okay,
so. The next exemption we have is a 17D exemption, okay? This is for any seniors over 70 that basically haven't qualified for your 41C. It also, it goes to any surviving spouse, and there's no age limit on that. Or if you're a minor child and you're with a deceased parent and you're in the home. And the base for this is $253, and it is adjusted, this is also adjusted annually
Okay.
by the cost of living. Have to turn these, sorry. And we also double these, all these exemptions are doubled, so this could go up to $506. But next year, it will go up by the cost of living, so it'll go up a little more.
okay, so in the agenda which I created, I was working off of the tax relief available document in the assessor's webpage, so I had put 239 base 478, that's since been raised
Yes.
to
for-
253, then 506?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
And that's because the cost of living.
The cost of living. Okay, so these basically were the amounts, what you took off the web were actually from fiscal 19,
oh, okay.
okay?
So can I just ask a question?
Sure.
How does it double?
Okay, so basically what happens is we can go up to the doubled amount. So originally, your first year you're applying, you're gonna get that $253. Next year, when you apply, you're gonna get at least $253. Now, if your taxes go up, say $7, I'm able to raise that up to $7 more, so you would get $260 off next year.
Okay, got
And then it can go all the way up to $506.
Okay,
What will happen though, you can never pay less than you did the year before. So if it literally went down, your taxes went down, you might get a little bit less, but you'll always get the minimum.
okay.
So that's how that works. Yeah, not all the towns in the state of Massachusetts, this is a local option that we bring on for each town. And we have voted in to double that for the extra assistance, but not all towns in the state of Massachusetts do that.
Now, it's my understanding, Mary, that this is a local option statute, and all of these local options, either initially or raising the limits, are solely by vote of town meeting?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, so if we were going into, when they did vote to double these, that went to town meeting
okay.
in order to increase them.
So are all of these at their respective maximums right now, the ones that have been voted in?
Well, it starts at the 250.
Okay,
Or say the 253, and then each year individually, depending on if your taxes go up, we'll give you a little bit more off. If
Oh,
your
okay.
taxes go down. Yes, so that's, you're never gonna start at that 253, and then next year you're automatically gonna, everybody will be at 506 and they stay there. So it's gonna go with whatever their taxes going up and down.
now, is
The
that,
way you get, the way you get to that double would
Mm-hmm.
be 1 year you start 253, your taxes go up $10, you're at 263. The
That's
next
correct.
year you started
At
at
two-
263, your
And the-
taxes go up
Yes.
$50. That's how you.
Yes, now you're gonna be at like
Incrementally.
310, and then say they go down 5, so then the next
Yeah.
year you're gonna be at
Okay.
like 305. Yeah,
I get it.
So each year, all of these applications we take in, we literally have to go and calculate and see what they paid last year.
That's amazing. That's a lot of work. Good
It's all
job.
good. It's all good.
No, it is good. That's a really nice.
Well, it is a
benefit.
very nice thing to do for for
Yeah.
people that need it, and it's an option that's out there. A lot of towns, like I said, they would just go with the minimum of say for this exemption, 253, everybody gets 253. That's it.
And how does that affect the overall picture, giving that kind of tax relief?
Well, it does, it kind of shifts the tax burden to the other taxpayers.
Okay,
But a lot of these, every year I do, it's called an MDM1 that I submit to the state, and we get reimbursed for some of these.
okay,
Not all of them, but we do not get reimbursed for the doubling. So they will reimburse up to, on some of them, they'll go up to that, the maximum amount. So every year we have to fill out these forms, we send them back in, and we do get some reimbursements some of the reimbursement from the state, but not all of it.
okay.
So do these monies come from either in part or all the overlay?
Yes, it all comes out of our overlay.
Okay, so we budget an overlay each year in town, and I know that's fluctuated over the years. It may be a little less recently, I'm not sure. But have we ever run into a situation where we find ourselves really whittling down that overlay because so many people have applied for
No,
exemptions?
because I can estimate what what we need every year. So we always budget for our exemptions, because those, for the most part, they're steady. So it's not all of a sudden we're gonna have, another 100,000. So it's gonna be a gradual increase. So we've always take your average and we budget that, and the other thing that comes out of our overlay would be our abatements.
Okay.
Real estate abatements. So that's what you can't really predict. If I with a value in be commercial property or something like that. But we have never under budgeted for our overlay. So that money is always there. So that
Okay.
would not, that's always right in the budget, and it's not gonna fluctuate as.
So a program like this and calling attention to these particular exemptions isn't going to necessarily have all these people come out of the woodwork and say, I didn't know about that, or.
No, that's why we try and get it out there, so
Okay.
we have it out on the website. I have done this program also for the senior center,
Mm-hmm.
just to get the information out there, because these programs are available, and a lot of people are entitled to them.
Right.
So if you meet those qualifications, we encourage you to apply.
Okay, and the total tax includes the CPA, the Community Preservation Act surcharge in the total taxes?
So what happens is now that's the other part. So once you get that abatement, the exemption, now we have to calculate how much off of your CPA. So that will bring your CPA total down just a little bit also.
Okay,
So, $500 off of your taxes is going to, instead of having $15 for CPA, it'll be bringing it down to like $7.
what is the CPA surcharge? Is it 1.5%?
1.5%.
Okay.
And the any residential properties, they get a $100,000 discount, right? We take that value right off the top
Okay,
of their value, and then we calculate from there.
okay,
Another qualification for the 17D, just like the 41C, must own and occupy the property as a domicile here for 5 years. And you do need to meet the the asset qualifications, but there is no income qualifications. So
okay.
that's, a lot of people will go to the 17D if you're making too much money, or you're over the income limits for the 41C. The asset limitations for fiscal 2020 are 58,120, which is, if you notice, it is higher than the asset limits for your 41C. So that's why a lot of people, if they don't qualify for the 41C, they might qualify for the 17D. The assets also include your checking, savings, CDs, IRAs, just like it was in your 41C. Also, it includes any real estate over 3 units, if you have a second home or vacant land and things like that. So we take all that into consideration, because those are our assets. Documentation also is required as of July 1st every year, so I want to know the balances that are there for July 1st. And for the first year, you would need to include either the birth certificate, or if you're a surviving spouse, you would have to include that death certificate.
Okay.
And like I said, for a surviving spouse, it's any age, if you qualify asset-wise.
Okay. So surviving spouse is any age, the spouse can be any age. They
Yes.
don't have to be 70.
That's correct. So it's either a senior of the age of 70 and older, or a surviving spouse can be any age. As long as you meet those qualifications, the asset, that 58, what did I say, 58,120. So if you're over that, you won't qualify, but it's any age for a surviving spouse.
Okay, how does this benefit a surviving minor?
Basically, it would be the taxes on where his domicile is. So if he lost a parent,
Yeah,
it would go, if he's the minor, they would apply, whoever, let's say who's ever been the executor of the state, or who's ever going to take care of that child, if they're going to live in that home, it would go on that tax, the property on that.
okay,
And that would also have to be applied for every year.
okay.
What is the period of time? Is there any grace period? In other words, let's say, is it as of 7/1, and then you have to apply and have the annual recertification done by 7/1, or is there a grace period that you allow people if they, for whatever reason, overlooked it, something came up?
Right. So basically, the qualifying date is July 1st for
Okay.
every year, for that fiscal year. We send out, once you get on our list,
Mm-hmm.
if you apply this year, you're definitely going to be on our list next year.
Okay.
So what we do is, in September, we send out applications to everybody that we've granted exemptions to. If we have people come in through the year and, and say, how do I get on that list, or what kind of tax relief can I get? We put them on the list, and we will send them out to anybody that's asked for them automatically in September.
Okay.
If you get them back to me by December 1st, then literally I can process these, and it will actually show up on your January 1st bill. So you'll have half taken off January, half taken off your April. But you actually have till April 1st of 2020 to apply.
Okay.
So if you miss this, if you didn't get the paperwork back by December, and all of a sudden January comes, and we always do send out reminders, at least. We've already sent out our first reminders, and if we know people that are out there that haven't, returned them, we will once again, probably in January or February, just send out one more reminder.
Okay.
And saying, we haven't gotten it back, if you want to, that way you can qualify up till April 1st.
Okay. Is there ever any situation where I know for example, similar to insurance, I know more recently with, let's say, long-term care insurance, there is designated people who are backup names that if, let's say, someone didn't pay their premium, that there's a backup name that like a late notice goes to. And I'm just using the insurance analogy here. That is there ever a situation where someone just may overlook it and then may lose out on that exemption, and then let's say there's a second or a third notice. I don't know how many notices you send out, but at a certain point, is there a backup person that you sort of seek out, or a person can list?
Well, we
as-
do take that, like, if we have, we have a lot of seniors that, like, their daughter or their son will help them fill this out. We ask them to put it right on, can we have your name and your phone number, so that if there's any questions, and we will reach out to them if we haven't gotten that return to us.
Okay, not only the applicant, but the backup person?
Right, we'll call them.
Right.
Oh, okay, that's,
Okay, yeah, we're not gonna keep sending them out to different
Right.
places, because it's, we're not gonna keep everybody's address, but if we notice that, that the gentleman that applies every year, and all of a sudden
Right.
we don't have it, and we've sent it, we've sent out a couple of notices, and they haven't responded, we're gonna look back at last year's application,
Right.
and we're gonna say, oh, the son was handling this for them last year. And
that's
we
a
will-
great service, because I would hate to see something fall through the cracks,
Right.
especially for someone who's a regular applicant.
Right, and we try very hard to make sure that doesn't happen, and if they don't respond, then we look to say, are they still living in the house, or did they sell the house? So we review that also, because once you've sold the house, it's not gonna go, we'll take them off the list, so we won't have to keep continually bothering them. But we do try very hard to make sure that the people that we know that have done it all along, that we're gonna make sure that they get those applications in. And let's see. Then the next exemption we have is for the blind. This is 37, clause 37. The base exemption for this is $500, and this can go up to $1,000. The requirements for this exemption is you have to have a certificate from the Commission of the Blind every year. So basically, they just have to call and the commission will send them out a new certificate every year. So we need that current certificate. Let me see, they must be a legal resident of the Commonwealth and occupy the property as their domicile as of July 1st. So this doesn't say you have to, you don't have to living here for 5 years. As long as you are domiciled there as of July 1st, you will qualify if you have the blind certificate. The property also can be jointly owned on your 41C, and your 17Ds. To get the entire exemption, it has to be you and your spouse that owns it. So say if you and your brother own it, you're only going to get half of that exemption. So which means you're not going to get the €1,000.
Right, okay.
So, the other thing I'd like to mention I don't have on here also is for motor vehicle exemption
Okay.
with the blind. This is an application that you have to, when you get your motor vehicle bill every year, you can fill out an application, and we need a copy of that certificate to go with that application. As long as the person's name is on that car, then we can exempt that bill,
Okay.
okay?
Now, what if the property is in a trust or something like that? Even though that the people that are domiciled there are actually paying the bills, how do you work that in
Okay,
in
for
this
a
program?
trust, and this does happen, and sometimes you have to weigh it out. First of all, if you retain a life estate, you will automatically qualify.
Okay.
So if you have a life estate and put it in a trust, as long as you retain that life estate, you will qualify as that you own that house.
Okay.
When you do a trust, we have to go through that trust, and we have to make sure that you're two things, that you're a trustee and you're a beneficiary, so that you retain sufficient ownership of that property. We have had in the past that have, they put it in a trust, and their kids are the trustees and the kids are the beneficiary, and they have literally not retained any ownership in that property, which means they won't qualify. So that's why if you put your property in a trust, we're going to review that trust, because it does have to qualify.
Okay. Do you often see that? Or do
We've
you
had a
occasionally
couple.
see it?
We've had a couple.
Okay.
Which is, and it's so hard because they're like, they're, I own this property, it's mine. I said, well, by right, on paper, if tomorrow the trustees want to sell this property, you can't stop it.
Okay.
So that's why you have to retain sufficient ownership of that
Okay.
through that trust. Okay, so we have a disability for veterans, an exemption, and also for their surviving spouses. These are at clause 22. Let's see, they must have a certificate of the veteran's eligibility from the Veterans Administration. It requires for a disabled veteran a 10% minimum disability. Okay, the amount of exemption, it varies between the percentage of that disability and whether the veteran is able to work or they need special housing. So we have 22s, we have a 22A, 22D, 22Es. So depending on your percentage of disability, could put you into a higher bracket. So
Is that necessarily combat related, or does that 10% have to be combat related, or is it any veteran that could subsequently become disabled after discharge?
right, it's as long as they've gone through the Veterans Administration and they have gotten from the veterans a minimum of a 10% disability.
Okay.
So, I mean, you have people that come back and they don't occur anything over there, but post-traumatic stress syndrome, even a tinnitus, which is your hearing loss, it's not going to happen right then and there. So, and if you have any questions or you feel you need to apply for that, I always tell them to go see, our Veterans Administrator, Justin, and he will work with you and get the paperwork, what you need and require, and how to apply and how to get to these services.
So what's Justin's last name?
Sousa,
Okay.
Sousa.
And is he in town, or is the veterans agent services, has that been regionalized?
Yes, it has. So he covers, either 3 or 4 towns.
Okay,
He hits here every Tuesday,
okay,
so, and he's here late on Tuesday, so he's here for the full day
okay,
when they're open, so, but at any point in time, if you call, I know he's, he will, and you leave a message, he will definitely respond to you. He also has a work-off program, somebody that works in there and answers the phone and can take any information for you, so.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So for the first year that you apply, we need a copy of your DD 214 and a veteran's letter, the veteran's letter stating your disability, your percentage. The DD 214 is one of the things that, because one of the requirements is a residence requirement, which was just changed this year by the governor. So it's, instead of being a 5-year requirement, it's gone down to a 2 years. So basically, if you lived in Minnesota, and that's where you entered the service, that, which would be on your DD 214, and then you moved here to Massachusetts, you have to live in Massachusetts for a minimum of the 2 years now, as of July 1st. But if you entered the service from Massachusetts on your DD 214 and you have moved back here, you will qualify because you were literally a resident of Massachusetts when you went off to the service. So
Okay.
that's the big reasoning for the DD 214, so we know where they entered the service. Okay. Also, the surviving spouse, if the veteran has that 10% or more disability, the spouse is entitled to continue with that exemption. And she'll have to, they will just have to sign that application every year. So, and then let me see, for the first, where am I? I've lost my way. So, in order to do this, to get the disability, like I was talking before, you want to speak with your local veterans administrator, Justin, and if you need help getting, the letter from the Veterans Administration, whether you have any, mental or physical issues after, being in the military. So. Oh, there's a couple more on this. I don't have them listed here. So like a 22, a regular standard 22 would start at, go from 10% disability up to about 90 or 80 or 90. For your 22s, it starts at a $400 off, and we can double that up to $800. We also have a 22E, which is for anybody with 100% disability, but it doesn't have to specifically be 100% disability. If you are rated at 80% disability, but you can't work, then you qualify as 100% disability. And that will definitely be said right on the Veterans Administrative Letter. Okay. We also, another one is a 22D, which is an exemption for any surviving spouse of a veteran that died due to a service-related disability. Okay. They will get that letter, and the 22D is the surviving spouse their taxes are exempt completely, and we are reimbursed by the state on all our 22s. Okay. So that's another thing but that is a great clause that they put in several years ago. So. And that has to be applied for yearly also. We do have motor vehicle exemptions for disabled veterans. So if you have a DV plate, which is a disabled veteran from the Registry of Motor Vehicles, you're automatically exempt. And that is reimbursed by the state. Also, some people don't like to get the disabled veteran plate, so what they can do is they can go to the Registry of Motor Vehicles, and if they qualify, they will get a letter from the registry. Mm-hmm. They can bring that letter to us also, and they can also be exempt.
So does the registry, if someone hasn't applied through you or the veterans agent for that exemption, does the registry automatically notify the town of that status?
No, they will go, the disabled veteran, they have to go to the Registry of Motor Vehicles themselves, and they have to apply. That's how, and they have to, I don't know exactly what they need for qualifications at the registry. Mm-hmm. But if they qualify, they will either get, like I said, the DV plate, which is a disabled veterans plate, or they can opt to have just the letter. you know, the registry will write out and send to us and give a copy to us so that we can exempt that,
Okay.
okay? Okay. This is back to the doubling of the exemptions, so, like I was saying, I did want to just mention that a 22E, which is the 100% disability, the minimum on that is $1,000, and we double that up to $2,000. Okay, and basically that is voted at town meeting, that we can double that up to a 100% double on that. The first year, like I said, is the statutory amount. In the preceding years, it will increase as your taxes increase. You can get a little bit more up to that 100%. And just note that you can never pay less than you did the year before.
Okay.
But you're always guaranteed the minimum. So. We also have tax deferral programs. Now, this program is literally having your taxes deferred and you can pay them later. Like whether you sell the house or if you pass away, then the taxes would have to be paid. The first one would be a 41A, which which is for seniors, anybody over 65. Their earning limit is like a 41C is 40,000, and they do have to provide, the information in an affidavit that, that they're going to defer their taxes. We do put a lien on the property, the town, and we can defer up to 50% of the value of that house. And if it does have a mortgage on it, most of them don't, but if somebody takes a mortgage or has a reverse mortgage, because the bank owns, has interest in that property, the bank has to sign that release saying, yes, that we can defer those taxes. Okay. And then, this is a 4% interest when it's paid back to us. We also have another, deferral program, which is an 18A. This is a hardship deferral, so there is no age or income requirements. The documents we require documents stating, your hardship, whether it's your medical bills and things like that. This, you can defer your taxes up to 3 years.
Okay.
Before you have to start repaying them back, and this is at 8%.
All right, so on the senior deferral, how many years is the maximum?
They can do it up until they hit 50% of the value of that home.
Okay, so it's not limited by years, it's by
Nope.
value. Okay.
Right.
And then the 18A is 3-year max.
Is a maximum 3-year deferral.
Okay.
It basically is probably if you're having some, real difficulties, at least maybe can help you get back on your feet if you can just defer those for 3 years, and then you would set up a payment plan with the treasurer collector to, be paying your taxes now and how much you're going to pay towards the back taxes. Okay. We also have work-off programs. We have 2 actually. We have a senior work-off program, and you want to apply through the senior center because she's got a list of things, departments that can use a work-off, and then she has the application over there. That would be Barbara in our senior center. This can reduce your taxes. You can work up to 125 hours at minimum wage. And that comes directly right off your taxes.
Is this sort of folks chosen by lottery? Like what if many people apply for it and it's just not the work to go around? How are the folks chosen?
When we put this program in, I did work with Barbara last year so that we increased the income for the HUD limitations.
Okay.
But we also increased, we used to only have up to 10 people. We've increased it up to 20.
Oh, wow.
Because we don't want to say, 25 people come, but we can only put 10 people to work.
Okay.
So that's why, just with using the senior work off, and they're wonderful. I have them in my office all the time, and I know they work in the clerk's office, and I know they do have work off, like say, on Saturdays at the dump with the LEAF program. So there's a lot of different.
Do any of the seniors work off in the schools?
I'm not quite sure on that.
Yeah.
We could talk with Barbara.
Yeah.
We can ask Barbara on that. That would be wonderful.
I work in Shrewsbury Public, so I do see seniors manning the desks where they check everyone in.
Okay.
And
I think we do have that, but I'm not gonna say we
Okay.
definitely do,
Just
but
curious.
I know I just got our list. There's gotta be, there was like 18 that did the work-off program this year, so,
Good job.
yeah, and it's great, so,
Get people out seeing other people.
yes. Requirements, I think I went over that, the age of 60, they must own the property in town and occupy it for at least 5 years. And like I said, I worked with Barbara to, get our, income increased to the HUD guidelines. Okay, this year I worked with Justin, the Veterans Administrator, and we were able to get a veterans work-off program put in place. So the applications, you would go through Justin to get the application. This also reduces, you can work up to 125 hours at minimum wage. The only requirement for this is you do have to be a veteran. Any veteran can work this off. And if you are, for the veterans work-off, if you're physically not able to do it, you can actually, like, have a person do it for you, like your son or
Wow.
a daughter or, a friend. They can actually work for you and that will come off of your taxes.
Oh, wow.
So that's
Wow.
a great benefit.
Yeah.
Oh, look, I didn't even, people at home are probably saying, what is she talking about now?
Well, we're not live, so they're not watching
good.
yet.
Also, before we go on with those, there were 2 other articles that we were able to get passed. Justin and I, we brought them to the town meeting, and it was, for our veterans, we had discussed earlier about putting your property into a trust.
Okay.
And a lot of veterans, they put their property into a trust and they were losing that ownership. So the new law that was passed, that we were able to vote this in locally for our town, it's a 22G, which would allow, if the veteran does put his property into a trust and they're still entitled to, as long as it's their domicile, they are still entitled to that exemption.
Okay.
Okay, we also put in for the 22H, which is a Gold Star parent, and this would be any surviving parent of a soldier or a veteran that has lost their life in active duty or gone missing in action. So that was another one. That is a full exemption also for their taxes, and this, we expect it to be fully reimbursable by the state.
Okay.
They haven't committed to that yet.
What's full exemption mean?
Their taxes are abated in full, so they have no taxes.
Oh.
Just like our 22D for the surviving spouse, that the veteran had passed away due to his military service, the bill goes away. Yeah. So,
That's good.
That's an amazing program.
like I said, the 22D, that is completely reimbursed by the state.
And that's full exemption? Is the 22G you said?
The 22H would be a Gold Star parent.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, that's full, all right. But the 22G isn't fully,
No, that's just stating that if they do put it into a trust, that they still qualify for that exemption,
okay,
as long as it remains their domicile.
okay.
Mary, I'm just curious from last fiscal year about how many people took advantage of this? Do you have any rough, or do you have an
138.
accurate? How many?
138.
Oh, okay,
And I have 133 on my desk right now for this year.
terrific,
Yeah,
okay.
so it's good. Yeah, it'll remain the same. Some people sell their houses and move or pass on, and new people come on. So we'll probably stay in that range. I'd like to see more, but that's a great number. So,
And then, does the statute have to be renewed every year at town meeting, or does it get voted in and it's good for 5 years? Any,
any changes we want to make? So, for instance, if we want to change the limits, or we want to say, okay, we're going to change the assets, that would have to be voted in, and then it's good until it's
Okay.
revoted. Once you've changed it, it stays in place until you change it again.
And cost of living is just a regular, it doesn't need to be voted. Okay,
No,
thank you.
because because that's automatic, that those cost of living, I get that from the state, and they said the cost of living is 2.38%. I'm gonna go up 2.38% on the qualifications.
Yeah, thank you, good.
You're welcome.
Right, and on this, the color-coded tax relief slide that's on the webpage, I'm just trying to think, there's 6 listed here, but you're going to have 2 more, so that will become 8 eventually.
Yes,
Okay, so if you would be so kind as to, from a formatting standpoint, put the update in such a either a font or size that would be best readable. I personally would have, as spreadsheets get wider and the print gets smaller, it becomes more difficult to read. And especially if things end up in grayscale on with some issues of contrast. So that's something our commission will be addressing, as well as in the website and the various web pages regarding folks with low vision, is contrast and how things are made available for reading devices and those with low vision, as far as making sure that things are in large enough print or in a format that doesn't become problematic.
okay. So, do you, have you done research what is the best contrast, that it's easy to read? I mean, because, I can change these.
I have not. I know that, anecdotally, I know that there's certain script and font sizes, and I don't know exactly what the recommended font sizes are or the script, but I know that sometimes, for example, when someone's reading a newspaper on recycled paper, it's sort of like a sort of tan. And then you have the soy ink, which is gray,
Right.
versus black ink on white paper, which has a pretty good contrast. Now you're dealing with, grayscale on a non-white, piece of paper. So, I could certainly look that up as far as what are the
I mean,
recommended.
if it need be, we can change
Yeah.
it to the,
Ooh, we can
let's
ask
do the
them
white
to.
background, bold the print a little more, get a little,
Very
Terry, yeah.
maybe use 2 pages instead of the 1. I mean, because I could probably do, put all the, say the veterans exemptions on a whole page itself, and that way I can make them
Yeah,
it bigger, and then all your other ones on the other page. So.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, so almost make it a 2-page. That.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Oh, I would
all right.
have no problem.
So
Yep.
not to put Terry Turgeon on the spot, right? But she has
oh
been,
no,
Terry has been gracious to offer our commission her expertise in the area of visual services. So,
And if you want to go to the WCAG 2.0 website, it stands for Website Content Accessibility Guidelines.
Okay.
It's version 2.0. That will have a lot of information about the types of fonts, colors, contrast. That will give you more information than you could ever imagine, Mary.
More than I.
But go ahead and Google it, because
Okay.
I use it on a regular basis. It's wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would like it, especially if you need to read it. I mean, if it's not read, if you can't read it,
Right.
things like that. I'd rather we can fix that, so that wouldn't be a problem.
all right.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Oh,
much.
you're welcome. And just a note at the end, my last slide, any assistance, you can always call or come into the assessor's office. My whole team, they're wonderful. They are all well-versed on all the exemptions, and we're more than willing to help that. Anybody that needs that assistance. Also, Justin for the veterans, and also the senior senator, Barbara. So,
And including filling out the paperwork too.
oh, yes.
Awesome.
A lot of times people will come in and they go, I have this application. And I go,
Right.
if you bring me in your documentation, I have no problem sitting there. We can go line by line and help you fill it out. As long as I have the
That's
documentation.
wonderful.
And if they come in and they give me and they're missing anything, I said, you know what, I'm just gonna hold this, because I don't wanna send them out with it, because then it might not come back. this is what I need, and I will write down exactly the list. I need, your bank statement from July 1st. So, I mean, very helpful. We want to, we want to help them in any way they can.
Yes.
Because let me tell you, sometimes these are very confusing.
Yeah.
Originally, when I started, it was one application that had every if you're a veteran, fill this section. If you're blind, fill this section. And we had people filling the entire thing out. I said,
Okay.
no. So I literally split them into individuals, and they're color coded. So if you're blind, you
Perfect.
get this one. And that's all the information I need from you. Veterans, all I need is your information. So
And are any of these forms available online?
yes, they are online.
Great, perfect.
So they can go there. Otherwise, if they can't do that, they can always call. If they're not mobile, you can always call my office, and we've been known to mail them out to you. Just what's your property? I'll mail the forms out to you. So
Awesome.
Great, thank you, Mary.
you're welcome.
Thank you so
All right,
much.
thank you
Well,
for
I
coming in.
appreciate the time because it's nice to get another way for people to know that we have
Yes.
these exemptions available. So
Thank you so much.
thank you.
Awesome. This is a huge education for me, but it's neat because people will come to us individually and ask us these questions, and
Yeah,
And if you can't answer, please send them down to the
For
the
sure.
assessors because we can we'll be more than willing to help them. So I don't know if I can put this back in here for you guys.
did you have this, Daryl? The PowerPoint
No, but
deck?
I'm gonna,
Do you have I'd written some notes on that. Do you have an extra copy?
You want another copy of
The PowerPoint deck?
which one?
The PowerPoint, right. Yeah,
Oh,
in other
look
words,
at-
yeah, this.
Oh, that one's mine. Wait a minute, I got another one. I know I do.
All right.
I'm gonna enter it into the meeting minutes. I'm gonna enter it into the meeting minutes. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Nice meeting
Thank you, Mary.
yeah, bye-bye.
You too.
If you have any questions, feel free to give us a holler.
Thanks. Okay. And backing up to announcements, there were two things I had overlooked, and we're in our third meeting, and the first two meetings, due to two conflicts, one of which was actually a conflicting select board meeting, Doreen DeFazio had been unable to attend each of the meetings. But I wanted to give a shout out to her for having been willing to step up to the plate as the select board rep at that time to this commission. And then the other announcement, and I will read only because only I can read my own handwriting, and I didn't type this up. And one of the things I wanted to announce is that Kathy Romeo will be teaching the basics of American Sign Language for grades 2 through 6 students. And that is offered through the Grafton Recreation Department and will be held at the Millbury Street Elementary School. Tuesdays, January 7th through February 11th of 2020 from 3:15 to 4:15 p.m. and the cost is $80. And the registration deadline for that is Tuesday, December 31st, 2019. And there are a few contact numbers or web email addresses for Grafton Rec: 508-839-5335, extension 1156, or emailing recreation@grafton-ma.gov. And the website to the Grafton Recreation Department is graftonrec.com. Okay. Why do I feel I get this pile of stuff in front of me. I feel like I'm missing something. Okay, item 3 on the agenda, ADA self-evaluation and transition plan. Based on our last meeting, our next step was to focus on sections 8 and 9, which were pages 32 through 50.
Another one of these for him?
Oh, yeah. Yes, I do, somewhere here. Okay. This is just the executive summary and doesn't include the sections that we were talking about, so. Yeah, and so maybe we'll huddle around one, you have a copy, right? We'll huddle around your copy. But, I got that copy today from Town Administrator's Office. Thank you, Becca Meekins. And I requested that we all are printed an individual copy by our next meeting, which is tentatively scheduled for Thursday, December 19th. So, I actually printed out those pages somewhere here,
32 through,
32 through, I think it was 50.
Yeah.
But there seems to be, what I noticed is that around 50 or 51, on page 51, they go to the the plan starts talking about the South Grafton Community Center on 51, but then goes back to the cost estimates on the municipal center
Yeah,
on
it
page
does.
52.
It's a little out of order.
And I initially thought that that was a duplication of what was contained on page 44, because it speaks of senior center veterans hall parking, but it isn't exactly worded the same, which led me to believe that maybe one was a kind of working draft. It wasn't entirely clear whether there was an overlap between pages 44 and 52. But what we were attempting to do is recognizing that although there are lots of pictures in this, and that allows some of the pages to go by quickly regarding the exhibits, there is a lot of data in here. It's 150 pages, and there is so-called low-hanging fruit here. And I would, prior to entering into what could be a detailed discussion on this, I wanted to point out a couple of things. And it had to do with, on the transition plan, there are various columns that identify, and I will voice a little bit of frustration that each of the pages on the transition plan does not repeat the header. And so
so it's tough to read.
it is tough to understand what you're looking at. The far left column is general description of obstacle. The next two columns, one is the ADA 2010 guidelines, the reference to what guideline we're looking at. And then the third column is Mass Architectural Access Board, the MAAB 521 CMR regs. Fourth column is type of action to be taken. Okay, and what we're looking at is the municipal center, town offices, veterans hall, and senior center. And the final four columns are their P, F, and T, P, F, and then the third one is TF. And what they stand for is priority. The first one, P, is priority. And there's a 4-tier rank, and I'll call your attention to page 30 and 31. There's a legend which indicates priority 1 is accessible approach and entrance. Priority 2 is access to goods and services. Priority 3 is access to public toilet rooms, and priority 4 is access to other items such as water fountains, public telephones, etc. And so it's if you can't access the approach, no matter how much beyond that point is accessible, it's almost becomes a moot point. So the priority 1 is the accessible approach and entrance. So that's the first column among the various those final columns. Feasibility is there's a ranking, 1 through 4, and rankings 1 and 2 are actually can be bunched, in my opinion, bunched as the easiest. 1 can be easily undertaken, moving furniture, putting a sign on a wall. Ranking 2 under feasibilities can be undertaken by maintenance staff, DPW, such as installing a post or sign, moving dispensers, adjusting a door closer, etc. Ranking 3 requires minor modifications which require skilled or specialized work. Certain installations, sinks, toilets, building a ramp that wouldn't be normal maintenance staff activities. And then ranking 4 is major modifications, which will require skilled to specialized work. Structural changes are an example, building additions, elevators, lift, things that, although it's not mentioned here, would probably require engineering work or could fall in a price range that would require a public bid. And then the time frame, TF, just prior to the cost estimate column, is recommended time frame for removing the architectural barrier is provided. Time frame I is immediate, 2020 to 2021, so the current or the ensuing fiscal year. And I'm not sure if they're referring to calendar year here or fiscal, but so N is near term 2022 to 2025. That final 4 in there is a typographical error. So it's 2022 to 2025. And then L long term is 2026 to 2029. Okay, and that's L for long term. And most are actually listed as intermediate or near term. And then the far right column is cost estimates.
Right.
And there was a cost estimate guide referenced on page 31 of the ADA plan. And it mentions that the RS Means Company, Inc., ADA Compliance Pricing Guide, second edition, updated for current pricing. And also the estimates are based on the type and complexity of the work. And there's a presumption that says it is being assumed that simple changes, feasibility ranking of 1 or 2, will be made through the use of town personnel, custodial, DPW, etc., and then more complex construction or those projects requiring specialized skills. Feasibility rankings of 3 or 4 would involve private contractors and include labor, overhead, and profit. I've been known privately and publicly to get mired in the details. Okay, I'll put on that hat. Okay, and so I needed to take a step back and tackling even. It looked on paper to say, oh, pages 31 to 50. That's only 19 pages, right? What I did is I looked at this from a sort of low-hanging fruit first perspective as the first things we're tackling. I thought that I, among the best of talkers, could talk this thing to death without necessarily taking action on this. So at the highest level, what I'll offer to the commission here is that I counted within these pages on sections 8 and 9, page 31 to 50, is, I think it was 68 items
That work.
that were in that middle column, feasibility ranking 1 or 2.
Yep.
There were 68 items that totaled a tad under $11,000. And so that, I looked at the big picture in that respect, and I was thinking, assuming that there's no dispute that because it could be dispute that our current staffing may not be able to, in their opinion, tackle a certain item listed, just because the Center for Living and Working indicated that it could or should be able to be tackled by our town staff. But assuming that it could be, a simple recommendation that existing budget monies, if possible, be used to tackle these 68 items. And even though it's 11,000, 2 of the higher priced items account for, I think, 2,000 of that 11,000. So there are 66 items that have a total cost of 9,000 or less. So that's my 2 cents as far as I mean, just these 19 pages we could talk about for hours and hours, and I wanted to know the commission's thoughts on how they looked at these rankings and these items. I didn't want to get into a real huge detailed discussion of trying to rank all of these 1 through 100 and something. I don't think we'd land on what things should be tackled first.
Yeah, and I don't think that's our job.
Right.
To I mean, I think to pick out this low-hanging fruit, clearly delineate it, and then present it and what the total cost is. And I
Right.
think that the select board and the town administrator need to figure out how that's gonna get done.
Right, right. I mean, I think that one of the primary questions is, are these accurate figures? I'm not an expert in that area.
Me neither.
And I would think that on under the feasibility 1 and 2, because they're assumed to be town staff, and you're only talking about materials costs, not labor costs. And assuming that these folks are actually town employees, you know, and
I
they
mean,
would need to be
looking
paid
at
extra.
just some of them, I know that our town employees could do
Right.
this.
Some of them were zero cost. It talked about moving a couch or something like that. It was
The protruding objects that are in the
Yeah.
hallway.
Right here.
That's moving the plants that
Moving
are
the
in the
plants,
hallway.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
moving
Yeah.
the planters.
Moving
Place a
sign.
fixed object under the fire extinguisher or relocate.
right.
So just put something under the fire extinguisher so it's
But,
not
I
sticking
mean, what
out.
we could give them a checklist and they can check off what's done, give it back so we know.
Well,
Right.
I would actually like to back up a little bit. I'd
Okay.
like to know if Bob Berger has done anything
Well,
since he
agree.
received this in July 24th.
Okay.
And I would like to know if, and the other thing, we're obviously going to ask him to come soon, right? Does he have a budget for this? Does he have manpower? Because in some ways, I think it behooves us to kind of get the pedal on the metal. Because if there hasn't been anything done in these past 5 years, or no accountability, or no real plan, this is that opportunity to see this through and get even these little things done.
Right.
Because I think my concern was looking at this list, and I love this list.
Yeah.
I appreciate all the work that went into it, but I know, like right now, we're waiting to hear if we have a grant.
Right.
That will be a huge step forward with us, and we can check it off the list. It'll be a win for so many people, because that means that more people will be able to access the senior center, Veterans Hall through the back door. I look at just priority number 1.
Right.
Can people with disabilities
Right.
get in the door?
Right.
Yeah.
Because even I looked ahead, obviously, to Silver Lake. If they can't get to Silver Lake, then why should we do feasibilities 3 and 4, which are about the docks? What does it matter if they can't even park, because there's no handicap parking? So I see number 1 as being very important, because until you have that, the others
Yeah.
don't matter as much. And I would just like to put that out there, that we really focus on the ones and the cost of the ones.
Are you talking priority or feasibility? Priority.
priority.
Priorities.
Yeah.
And I,
Yeah.
I agree.
right.
Yeah, and some
I-
of them were easy. They were $50 to reset
Yeah.
a sign.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at, on page 34, for example,
Yeah.
I certainly agree that there are a lot of priority 1s in here.
Yeah.
And as far as, keeping in touch with the town administrator, select board, and then to some extent, when we talk about capital budget items or just the general budget, finance committee, capital improvement planning committee, CIPC, there are like accessible route to building rear. They were talking about different costs in like $5,000 and such. That may need to be tackled individually because the feasibility level is listed as 3. And so, maybe we tackle both of them at the same time. A recommendation that without reprioritizing 1 to 68, those which fall within feasibility level 1 and 2, that those be tackled within the existing budget. They're all within this building.
And that's the other issue I was just gonna say. These are old buildings, folks.
Yeah.
So I see where you do have to continually maintain, and I know that's built into all of these costs administratively, is not only the cost to run the building, but the ongoing maintenance, and it will curve up as the building grows older. I have to tell you, I'm really disappointed in the police department and the firehouse. those have been built within the last 7 years and already they're non-compliant. I'm not concerned about them as much because they're not as public used as much as these are. And the age, I think these buildings, I mean, they're beautifully retrofitted. I'm not complaining about that, but in terms of accessibility, I can see these becoming, you know, these first two buildings, the Veterans and the Municipal Center are really huge, objects to tackle.
Right.
So,
So yeah, in other words, we don't, it's almost like there are certain things we can't ignore. I certainly, all of these are important, especially where the priority ones, yeah, if you can't get to it, what good is the service,
Yeah.
you know?
why have things lowered to a certain height if no one can
no one
get
can
in
get in the
the
door in the
building
first
to
place.
begin with?
Yeah.
Right,
And so,
yeah.
yeah, and so there are priority level ones, and I'm seeing that at least there's some priority level ones that are feasibility level 1 and 2, or at least 2, where those can be tackled. But it's sounding like a lot of the priority ones are level 3 or 4 that require specialized work regarding
Some of them,
some of them. I think, you know, a lot of them.
I mean, I think we need to break it down.
Yeah,
I think that's what we need to do, not necessarily rank it, but break it down. I like the system that they came up with to rank everything. It's clear as a bell.
Right.
And, I mean, it's not up to us to tell the town how to spend money or what to spend it on, but it's up to us to make them crystal clear, aware of how much it's gonna cost, so if they are actually coming up with a 5-year plan, they can stick it in.
Right.
yes,
Yeah.
Right.
definitely.
Right.
I
And
agree.
especially where a lot of this is, they're listing items that are literally like under $100.
That could just go
Yeah.
on a checklist, get done,
Right.
Or they say remove it and then it's zero.
right?
You know, I mean, you know, but it does get, for people who are really into measurements and ADAG standards, it really gets technical, and some of this is not needed until someone requests an accommodation. So we can watch for that too.
Yeah.
Because in public, if there's, so there's the public areas and then there's the employee areas. If you have an employee in a wheelchair or who is deaf, then you will need to install specific equipment and the fire alarm equipment that will indicate a flashing light. Then you spend the money. But until that time, some of these items we can look at and say, let's focus on the public areas until we have an accommodation request, because the employee coat hook is 6 inches too high.
Right.
Until we get an
Yeah.
employee who needs that, you know, we don't have, and by the way, that was a zero cost. But just to, you know, make an example of
Right.
that, you know.
I mean,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
a good example, but at zero cost, you might as well just do it.
Right. Right.
I mean, who knows that they need to ask for these things?
Right.
Right.
Right, but, so when you look at zero, also imagined, so you have to pay the time of the person to
Right.
change it. So there
Yeah.
is always that
There is the
little-
labor cost
There is a
involved.
labor cost. That's about it, though.
Yes, and so they may not be greatly impactful or not. I mean, we don't know. We don't know who has chosen not to complain.
Yeah.
You know, we
Well, you know what, so here's the thing. If there were on, which we should have, according to here, we should have a grievance or a complaint form, or on our website, every web page should say, if this is not an accessible web page, please contact the disability
Right.
coordinator. I mean, sometimes once you build it, because people don't know they can complain, or there's
Right.
no way to place it forward or bring it forward, it maybe if that were to become a standard, that all offices, all business, not all businesses, but all public or town entities had that ability, then we would get that information from people.
because right now it's only, I think, in like one place that there is a grievance procedure that has come out of this, but it's not posted in every place that people land on the website or within an office in town.
Well, they were concerned that we don't have a grievance procedure with the 2 steps to actually to renew the complaint, then the 2-step review process, and then the time frame for review and resolution. They said we don't have one.
So,
There's no mention of a policy on the town's website. It's not posted anywhere in town hall. It's not on the, so they
But I think
suggest,
now, it
that's
is.
low hanging fruit.
yeah, we need to put it on the Commission for Disability webpage.
Okay.
Yeah, but that is low hanging fruit. That's an easy,
I mean, policy, I mean, Donna's not here tonight, but she could be taking that straight back to her board and saying, we need to do X, Y, and Z, put it on the agenda,
Okay.
you know? So,
yeah, so we have places where we can, if you need an accommodation, here's where you request it. If you want to grieve something, here's where you request it. And here's the coordinator of disability information, and give Bob Berger's information.
Okay.
So that was on page 18 of the recommendations of the accessibility plan, that
okay,
we do make that overtly and publicized. And
that is easy, that is really low hanging fruit.
it is.
Why can't I find anything? I'm gonna
And-
borrow your copy.
And can I just tell you, from legal counsel, from our point of view, you should always have a grievance procedure on your first page of anything. Or, you know, if there's an issue or there's a problem,
Yeah.
please contact, so that people can report things.
Okay, I say that's first we get done is policy and a procedure.
So, Roger, who would Bob Berger be the person who authors or sets up or has responsibility for the Commission on Disability webpage?
I mean, he's the compliance officer, the designated, the building inspector, regardless of who it is the
Right.
compliance officer. He happens to be in that position, so I would think he would be playing a role in.
But we don't.
So
Well, you as the
that-
chair, do you have authorization to build or insert content and post?
You know, that's something that I had not brought up.
Yeah.
As far as even if I did have access, I don't want to get mired into needing, let's say, permission to do everything. I think that maybe by consensus, I mean,
No.
a lot of the stuff that, I think that a lot of this is pretty routine and doesn't need a vote of this commission every time I let's say,
No, you,
want to add something to the,
you do,
yeah, I do,
yeah.
okay.
You do.
Okay, and then,
So-
All right.
and then
That's
does
a
it go
motion.
through, but does
Okay.
it go through a vetting process
right.
through, like, we have institutional communications, so any change that we make to a webpage has to go through a process to maintain consistency with our branding and marketing and use of
Right.
icons or, things like that. Do we, for our Commission on Disability webpage, do we have to go through a layer before we get it on the webpage, so, to make it public?
That is a very good question.
We-
So we need to find the answer to that.
Right, and I didn't
Okay.
want to sound like I was renegade. I was thinking about things like,
Yeah, you sounded renegade.
Oh, you're
Renegade?
Renegade,
Yeah, I'm
Roger.
Renegade,
It goes
right.
with your middle name.
yeah, right. there you
Roger
go.
Renegade Tran.
There you go. What I was referring to is things like links to the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Oh, yeah.
That things, I mean, with such a thing like that, I guess, for matter of consistency, I guess, yeah, to as a commission to vote that would be something to, as far as me, if I had access to change web content or add things.
You wouldn't, I mean, because we are a voting block.
Right.
In order for you to like make major changes, you would definitely need someone to make a motion,
Right.
the exact words to be written,
Right.
and then we'd vote on it.
Okay, I'm referring more to like
But
links.
the ADA links and stuff like that, you
Right.
know,
Or Mass Gov links
Right.
related to, I mean, it makes sense to be a resource to the community
Right.
on that page, but in terms of what we have to go through to get to that page to be able
Okay.
to do that. So maybe we need to ask Donna as our liaison, how that works. You know, I'm sure the town has an authorized individual who works with the content of that.
Yeah, I mean, I used to know the person, she no longer works here.
I know, and see, I don't know, yeah.
So I don't know who does it anymore, yeah.
I know,
But anyways, so getting back like 3 steps. So we kind of went down the path for the commission page, web page, but also to talk about, you know, what is our grievance procedure? Who's our, when can Mr. Berger come and talk to us about where he is so far with this document and how can we help support his efforts to get
Yeah.
as much done as possible?
So you think it's premature to, let's say,
I mean, I think, do you mean, I'm guessing what you're gonna say, so go ahead, sorry.
no, no, I was thinking, you know, and maybe this is putting the cart before the horse because Bob Berger may have some of these things already in motion.
Right.
But my thought was if we were to consider voting to make a recommendation that these are the things we feel can be tackled right out of the gate, these, and I counted 68, I could be off by a few, these 68 or so items that constitute feasibility levels 1 and 2, that we recommend that, to the select board that, that these be addressed in the immediate future, however we wish to define that, and within the existing budget, that, and that would allow the town administrator, to work with Bob, who reports to him. I don't wanna be, I mean, the exception here was like when Mary came before us, I tracked her down as a department head, but I'm, on second thought and backing up, I'm thinking that because we report to the select board through the town administrator, is it really our job to chase down department heads when in fact all those people report to the town administrator? And so,
Yeah.
and then, so maybe, you know, Tim McInerney and then Becca Meekins, the assistant town administrator, could get together to actually see whether there's any dispute in any of these feasibility levels. But to the extent that there aren't, leaving it up to them, that it's our board's recommendation that these are the things that we recommend should be addressed first. Those items within these sections, within this building.
And I think that we will do that. I don't think we can do it tonight.
Okay.
Because we still have to read the second half.
Right.
And Alex, you will love reading the second half, okay? I think that, because I know we divided into 2, so the second half will be in December. Not a lot changes, but can I just say that this is so eye-opening as to the granular level, to the detail. And if we're just looking at these, and remember we mentioned at our first meeting, we were concerned about the schools. This
Yeah.
doesn't even deal with the schools.
Right, and Donna was gonna liaison to that.
Right. So, you know, so we're really not, so once we get the whole picture with what they were able to do, I think we should then make that motion. So if you can hold that motion to, what you just said, which was so wonderful, Roger, about the let's prioritize, let's recommend.
Yeah.
And that we look at the low-hanging fruit, the ones and the low costs. But let's make sure we look at the whole thing in its entirety before we do that.
Okay.
Yeah, to have the full big picture.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, in other words, just because we started with this building, I mean, we started with this building because so many people use it and it's such a, sort of an epicenter to activity. But,
Yeah.
right, in other words, yeah, that's, yeah, I may have jumped ahead of myself.
No,
But
but
that-
you
that
get
we-
excited looking at this because you're thinking, wow, this could be done.
Right.
And you know what, too, I think that, being appropriately selfish to say, all right, we know that there are challenges that are coming financially for the town and that we're facing. And these discussions are up front and center. To the extent that we can get our foot in the door for so many items, the so-called low-hanging fruit, so many items for such little cost relatively speaking, that I would love to get as much tackled earlier on in the process versus when we're in the depths of budget discussions where even these items are really getting kicked down the road.
And in order to be compliant, everything has
yes.
to be done.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
So there's no,
right.
We're one lawsuit away. If we
Right.
want to save a lawsuit,
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the average lawsuit for a legal lawsuit for disability right now, lawyers' costs alone, you're looking at for any of us to retain a lawyer, any department or the town, you're looking at several $100,000 to start. So that's before you go to trial. That's assuming you're just doing the prelim. So I always keep that in mind when I share that information. Because then you go on to discovery and then possibly, to
Yeah.
court. So what we're trying to do actually is really be in compliance because disability is a civil right, but we're also trying to keep and protect the town from legal action.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we are doing our best. We're not spending money frivolously. We're trying to protect the town from anything that could be misconstrued or be discriminatory towards someone, which would open us up for a lawsuit.
Especially where it's now been identified in writing with timeframes. You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
and why didn't Grafton spend $50 on some protruding item? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Because that what you're talking about could be the protruding item which causes someone
Yeah.
to get hurt or something like that. And so yeah, all right. So we could certainly agree to not take any action on that until we have gone further on in the document. But I think it's a good start to frame these discussions as to there's a lot of easy stuff
Oh, yes, definitely.
on this, and by addressing as many items as possible, we're being impactful in helping those people regarding civil rights, and also showing other towns and the powers that be that we take this seriously, that we're not going to just shelve this like a lot of other studies in town for various reasons have been tabled. So, all right, so do you want to then, what pages or what sections, is it 10 and 11? I know that next is South Grafton Community Center, Nelson Library, then it goes Police Department, Historical Commission Building, and then Fire Stations 1, 2, and 3. But the Fire Station 1, that's a relatively new building, and that's probably not going to have a whole lot of stuff that needs to be addressed.
I was disappointed that there was a lot even listed that should have been vetted when it was built. I'm concerned about the parks in Silver Lake
Right.
and the facilities there. You're right, the Grafton Fire Department and the Historical Commission Building, they're not high-use places. I'm just trying to think of, if we were just to do the parks and recreation, that's a pretty considerable chunk of pages.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to minimize their importance, I'm just trying to define our reading for the next time.
Right.
So recreational facilities is page 82 to 137, so that's a huge chunk. So do you want to, should we take pages 56 to 80, or do you want to wait for
Can
those?
I want to jump ahead, and I was going to put this on, excuse me, on new business, but because we're not limited to, basically, the whole ADA self-eval and transition plan is on the agenda, even though I said that the focus would be on 32 through 50. I actually had a very productive discussion with our recreation director, Jen Anderson, yesterday.
Oh, good.
And it had to do with actually Grafton Celebrates the Holidays, but it morphed into this larger scale discussion about her acknowledging that the next thing she needs to tackle after the holidays is the ADA self-eval and transition plan. She was very much aware of this study and how it involved things that were in her ballpark, pun intended. So she was familiar with that, and she'll be reading through the report after the holidays. And she offered her involvement, including coming before the commission here.
Oh, good.
Okay, so that we're not reinventing the wheel, that we have someone who's very much aware of these issues that are contained in this report. And as far as, so we already have an existing 2007 open space and recreation plan, but I didn't see where it really touched upon disability access. And so she had mentioned that she's looking to get funding in the spring, likely through community preservation funds, for a recreation master plan, okay, that would recognize all the work that 2007 committee performed, and then work with the recommendations that are contained in the ADA self-eval, and then come together with a document that is comprehensive to include all of this. So, and one of the things that she had mentioned along these lines is playground surfacing and acceptable rubber matting in place of what's called port in place. Just the mulch areas are, that aspect alone, the surface areas, make all these parks non-compliant. So that was one example of some of the remediation that needs to be done, as well as on an ongoing basis, really working to replace the various pieces of equipment. So, we don't need to reinvent the wheel in that respect. So, maybe in January, maybe that would be something that we could really work closely with Jen and her team to address as sort of the experts in that area, where she's already recognized our evaluation here and the need, and recognized, in her opinion, the need for a recreation master plan which incorporates these disability compliance issues.
Well, when they did their survey of areas that were viewed as accessible, and they did a survey of the town, the only two areas that were mentioned as having accessibility options were the Board of Assessors, so I should shout out to Mary Oliver, who just left, and the other was the Council of Aging.
Okay.
And I would love to see more places mentioned the next time this survey is done, if there's ever a self-study again, because you think of recreation and how people really wanted our new parks to have accessibility features, they weren't mentioned.
Right.
So I know there's been work done in the past, but to make that just very well known, maybe they didn't ask the parents these questions of individuals who use the parks and use the accessible playground equipment. But
And one of the interesting things is that sometimes people who are in so-called disability circles may even have their own lens in which they see things. And I remember recently at town meeting, this whole issue got brought up, and it's been back and forth regarding Super Park.
yeah.
Okay, so
Yes.
so let's say we had, let's say theoretically the money weren't an issue, and we were able to build a super duper park behind where the new library is going. I'm thinking to myself, yeah, right near a 120 decibel train horn that comes through. What about folks who are sounds, who have sensory issues? And so I remember at town meeting, this discussion went back and forth about the physical aspects of these facilities. And no one was talking about the fact that you have a church bell, albeit predictable on the hour and a half hour, that ring at a certain decibel level. A fire horn that is the god awfulest thing to listen to. Does that still ring during,
Not at noon.
not, okay. But as far as, no, as far as the fire horn, or does the call department have, other devices that
Yeah, they don't,
alert?
but I remember growing up on, yeah, we
Right.
used to hear it all the time. I hardly
I
ever
remember
hear
it
it
was the
anymore.
worst. I went to South Grafton, and when that fire alarm went off, I was
Yeah, everybody in
like-
the school.
It's like, it's
I
like,
hated it.
it's like
Yeah.
10 feet from the building. It's like right there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And I had big sensory issues with it. So
And so, you know, those are the things that I had thought of just in the placement of that park, where the fire horn, which is unpredictable and somewhat predictable, could be, you know,
Noise
let's say
pollution.
Grafton and Upton Railroad announcing their regular schedule. And at least, and that could be on signage at the park to say, there's a 120 decibel train that comes by at these designated times. But you know, those are some things that certainly, even within people who are in the know about disability issues, totally miss the sound and sensory issue regarding the or at least it wasn't publicized, about that particular location regarding decibel level. But we can work with Jen closely,
So,
without reinventing the wheel.
yeah. So just because it's 8:30 and we're going on
Yeah.
almost 2 hours of meeting.
Okay.
So for number 3, what is our next plan? I have in my notes, that we need to talk to Donna as our rep about, and this is a very low hanging fruit, about a grievance and complaint form process and policy, and get the select board working on that. We need to talk to Bob Berger about what he's the compliance officer. And we were gonna have him come in maybe?
Yeah.
And talk about
Sure.
Where
number-
he's at so
the
far.
68 items.
Yeah.
What he's done
What
so
he's
far.
done, yeah.
And then, we have to also, I mean, we would either talk to, I would say somebody has to talk to Tim about what do we need to go through to access the webpage.
Okay.
And then if, Roger, you have specific content, then that is something you
Right.
should write down.
Right.
And we can consider that on the
Right,
next
right.
agenda.
Right, content would be a vote, and the other stuff would be, rather than reinvent the wheel, there's a lot of great links that don't require us to restate that
Right.
content.
So
So-
finding out from Tim what we have to go through, and then we can list out what we need to do.
Okay.
All right,
So I have those 3 things to do immediately.
okay. So-
And then we had just, then the last thing is, what are the next pages we're gonna read?
Okay,
Oh, okay. So let's save, if I may interject, let's save the rec plans, which are pages
January.
82
Yep,
to 137. Let's save those for the January meeting.
okay,
And in the meantime, let's just finish that middle section, which was where we kind of left off with the double pages, unfortunately, page, I think
That'll be-
55 to 81.
okay,
81.
all right.
perfect.
All right, and then, all right, moving on then, minutes of October 17th, 2019. Did everyone look at the draft minutes that Daryl had?
Yes.
sent?
Yes.
Okay.
Whoops, just clicked off.
Do I have a motion?
I motion to accept them as submitted by Daryl in the draft form.
Okay, do I have, all right, motion been made by Christie to accept them as drafted. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, second by Catherine. Any discussion? I do have a couple of small administrative items. At the top, I think you would use a template from the prior meeting, so we were
Yeah.
actually in room F. At the top, we were in room F, upstairs during that meeting.
Make a copy. Okay. So we were in room F.
F, yeah, conference room F, not A, which is this room. And then below that, videotaped and accessible is this long string of web link
Yep, copied straight from the last.
from and that was our link from our September meeting. The only difference in that link is that the number, instead of 5049
Yep,
in that string of web address, it's 5164 is the reference to the that particular meeting on the Grafton Cable website.
and is there a question mark in it?
Yes,
Okay.
everything, yeah, is a question mark, is
Okay.
it, but it's 5164. And then the other thing, and I had asked you, Daryl, on the number one, vote to organize the commission, and the number 5, the minutes, motion passed 4-0, and then 1 abstention. I didn't see anything in the open meeting law that required the identifier of who abstained, or if there was a split vote, who was in favor and who was against. But my own opinion, and folks can agree or disagree with me, is that when we either have like a split vote or an abstention, that then we identify who those individuals were. Does that matter to you? Do you think that it should be noted, or?
It doesn't matter to me.
Okay, does
I
anyone
mean,
have an opinion on that?
all I'm coming off of is the school committee, and we didn't ever note it,
Yeah.
so our clerk, our paid clerk, never
Okay.
noted it.
All right. I mean, all right, then that's fine. If
I
we
mean,
can just,
if people complain and they want
No,
to know, I
no,
don't have a problem noting it.
no. I think more important is if there's if
I mean,
someone actually objects to something and
Clue-
there's then we'd have a roll call.
Well, in Clue, how you can tell who abstained is who was not at the meeting, because they are required to abstain
Right.
from certain things.
Yeah, and I didn't know the process by which if someone signed off that they actually viewed the meeting, they could then thus participate. But that's getting probably hyper technical.
That's hypertext.
That's hyper technical. Ignore that then. So we can just leave that as is. And then the other thing is that
And if people are really curious, they can watch the,
they can watch it. It's great entertainment.
no.
No, I'm psyched that these meetings are videotaped. And then the other thing was on 7 new business, as far as all members of the commission signing up for email alerts. It was basically that I moved forward with signing the commission's email address up for the email alerts. I mean, people could, if they wanted to, sign up individually, but also that I would be signing the commission's email address up for those reports, which I ended up doing, so.
Is that important information?
Nah, I didn't want, well, it was, I was trying to consolidate that we weren't going in different directions or it had to individually sign up, but we can just leave that as is.
Okay.
Because that was just a follow-up item that,
Oh, so you don't want all members of this commission should sign up?
in
for
other words,
email
I
alerts?
had mentioned that if someone were to
You
leave,
signed up the disability commission,
or I was going to sign up the disability commission,
and then we'd all get them.
and we'd all get them, and if individually, upon leaving the commission, not that any of us will leave, if any of us did leave the commission, then we'd really need to sign up individually to maintain those emails. So I was simply saying that I would be
That's good.
moving forward with signing the commission's email address up for the state emails and blog information. And that's all.
Okay.
All right, so does anyone have any objection to, inserting those changes in? Those, okay. Any further discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor, of the motion to accept the minutes, with the recommended changes? All those in favor, raise their hand. All those opposed, declare the motion carried unanimously. All right, so old business, I think we can plow through some of this stuff very quickly. I know we're approaching 8:45, and, all right, Grafton celebrates the holidays. I also had a discussion with, on this matter with Jen Anderson at Recreation Department. The timelines for all these things really coming together in the summer, and then the deadlines being in early October for the venues to identify that they want to be a Frosty stop, really made it unworkable to really interview or send a questionnaire at that time after the fact to every single business for an accessibility questionnaire. So what Jen recommended is that we as a commission between now and in the summer come up with not necessarily a lengthy questionnaire, but some questions that would identify the different levels of access, and also at some point working with her to make recommendations maybe on other items and other type of activities that maybe folks hadn't thought of regarding disability awareness or folks with various limitations and such. So so that's something we would be tackling in 2020 and working closely with her to make sure all those businesses have enough time to so that we're not putting pressure on them and then them being slighted in the public eye for maybe not being accessible when we may have given them too tight a deadline to work under for this year's Grafton Celebrates the Holidays. The other thing I'll mention is that, as an example, there are some venues where an area is completely accessible and another isn't. And I was thinking of one place where there was a building in town that was completely accessible, but then they had a s'mores fire pit, which was an equal centerpiece to the activity, which you had to walk, 50 feet into a field, and so it's like, well, wait a minute. So part of the venue was accessible and part wasn't at all. And so really getting to the nuances of identifying those areas that are accessible and having time in advance of 2020's
What's Jen's last name?
Anderson.
I know her.
Yeah, and so she's been very helpful with recommendations in that regard. So
So what if we work with Jen, will it be in an open meeting or will it be in a workshop?
it could be a workshop, or I don't know what people's schedules are, but she was willing to work with us as a commission. So I would look forward to one or more workshop meetings that are under an hour in length.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the next item, accessible handicap parking fines account balance. Actually, Donna Stock is currently working with Tim on this item.
Okay.
One of the things, looking back at the town reports, each of the police department annual reports indicates parking fines receipts, but that could be anything from a fire hydrant to a crosswalk. It doesn't delineate receipts that were attributed to accessible fines. So Donna is working with Tim McInerney to really dig back to 2009 to see what amounts came into the town for accessible violations.
Okay.
As a placeholder, Grafton Special Ed Parent Advisory Committee, CPAC, Melissa Lackey, I know she had invited me individually to their meeting this past Tuesday, which I was unable to make anyway, but in hindsight, I wouldn't have been there to represent the commission because we didn't vote that somehow I should have been there, you know, to represent the commission. So, you know, maybe at some point in the near future, she can be on the agenda, as well as maybe we had talked about, there's a school committee rep on CPAC, correct? And so, either, you know, having a joint meeting or having one or a couple of folks, meet with our commission, to discuss, how we can work together. Because right now, it seems like because of the ADA self-eval being confined to the municipal, doesn't mean that we should restrict our mindset that disability access issues are restricted to the non-school side of things.
Right.
Yeah.
So, anyway. All right, trainings. One of the things we talked about at last meeting was who's trained and for what. So I had not contacted anyone since our last meeting regarding this, but what I did do is I did look at recent town reports, and police was more prominent in this versus the fire department. There seemed to be more trainings in the police area, and some of them did clearly identify that they were disability related, including autism.
Good.
And so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to follow up for our next meeting. What specifically was the nature and extent of those trainings, and who are some of the trained individuals within police, fire, and EMS?
And I guess extending this just popped up in my district. Our special ed department had to go in and train, because mandatory bus drivers gets trained too.
Oh, okay.
And they don't always. So our department just went in and did the basic training for all the bus drivers in our district.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
And hadn't done it in X amount of years, and they need to be trained every year, so, on certain things, just
Yes,
like all
yeah.
people, just like,
Okay.
you know. So, it might be worthy to check with Jay.
Okay. That's a great idea. Yeah, I mean, think about that.
And
That's
I
such
mean,
a
that-
huge responsibility, and a lot happens on the bus, you know,
Yes,
or
the
can
bus is
happen on the bus. And
scary place.
behind the bus driver's head, you know, a lot,
Oh, totally.
you know, and things can escalate quickly. So that's a great
Just leaving them
recommendation.
on the, well, as we know, the worst case scenarios, when they're left on the bus or left in the van, and then the driver goes off and the
Right.
student is there strapped in their seat
Right.
for hours.
And
So,
what are their protocols? I mean.
Yeah.
I assume that the bus company would automatically do these trainings because they're transporting kids, but
Yeah.
that's not true.
Assume nothing.
Assume
Assume nothing. Trust but verify. But that's a huge one, and that's good to hear, because now that allows us to really address this issue if there is any deficiency. It can only be helpful. Next item, Mass Office on Disability. I did in fact sign us up for the email, and I feel neglected because I have not in the past month received any blog or newsletter.
I was wondering
It's,
about that. Okay.
So that, yeah,
Is it gonna bounce to my Gmail?
yeah. In other words, the Disability Commission at grafton-ma.gov. Anytime,
Right.
like when I
I
sent,
used to get that from MASC.
yeah. So I sent the agenda and meeting packet to the commission through that email address, and I ended up being personally on the receipt on my Hotmail address as well. So, they're probably few and far between, maybe once every other month, who knows? But
okay.
probably not, I don't, I was thinking, oh, Mass Office on Disability monthly, maybe it's a quarterly, who knows?
Okay.
I found the last newsletter to be very useful. It had good information on it. So I would recommend going on the Mass Office on Disability webpage. It has a ton of useful information. Next and final item on the agenda prior to just the listing of our next meeting is new business, okay? Hassan-Amisco, in parentheses, Cisco Homestead, 80 Brigham Hill Road. even though this is not a town-owned building, belongs to the Nipmuc Nation, they've received a handful of Community Preservation Act appropriations at various town meetings going back a few years to renovate that building.
Right.
And so I talked to Dr. Ray Gould, who had actually come in front of a town meeting for the most recent CPC 45 grand to help make for design. It was for design purposes, and included in that design was making an accessible back entrance. Now, question becomes: are there any historic restrictions which would preclude the approach? Because if the approach isn't accessible, no amount of accessibility modifications really would make that truly accessible. So I had some brief conversation with Dr. Gould, and this has been her busy time. So I will be doubling back with her at some point in December to discuss what restrictions, if any, are there on the approach. I don't know if you've been up there, but all the quaint pictures show it as a level building, but it's not. It's the right side of that building kind of looks like it falls off a cliff. So
Yeah.
if you've been up on Brigham Hill Road, there's almost like there's like no parking on the road. It's a tight curve,
Yeah.
and the left stone wall, which is very close to the side of the building, is considered a very integral part of the history of the building, and I think that is the property line. So I'm hard pressed to imagine that they would allow someone to level that slope to put parking up there. But if they didn't, I don't see where any other part of that property would be accessible, because you're like 1.5 stories below the back entrance when you're on the right-hand side of the building. There's like a dirt parking lot. It's not even a parking lot, it's part of the property. But I'm not throwing my hands up in the air on this. I'm simply leaving open the possibility that there could be something that could be worked out, even if there are restrictions, to make the approach accessible, in addition to and connected to their plans for the accessible back entrance and other accessibility features within the building. And to the extent that we could get behind them, if that is the case, in putting our signature behind funding efforts, either at the local level through Community Preservation Act funds or at the state level. They're not federally, Nipmuc Nation is not federally recognized. So Department of Interior grants are probably out of the question. But even though it's not a town-owned building, that doesn't mean that as a disability commission, we wouldn't necessarily, let me rephrase that. We wouldn't necessarily keep a hands-off approach, because it is a very important historic resource to the town. So I'll be following up with Dr. Gould in December to see what their plans are and what the restrictions are on the various aspects of that property regarding
If they're not a town-owned building, are they under the same rules?
They are technically under the historic, I think it was historic,
there's a historic restriction, right?
yeah, that, technically those sites aren't, required to keep compliance with ADA because they're on the historic register.
right.
So any ADA compliance on their part is merely voluntary.
Right,
So just encouraging them to do it
right.
is pretty much all we can do. We can't require them to do anything.
Right, and I wasn't suggesting that
Yeah.
there could be historic restrictions, and that I think existed at one Grafton Common, but I'm talking about for us to get behind an effort,
Yeah.
no matter how accessible the entrance is, you don't get beamed down to the entrance. And so there would have to be some component that would be feasible to make the approach accessible.
Yeah. So at least encouraging them to
Right.
take it into account.
Right.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And what I was referring to was, more specifically, is that in their efforts to fundraise, the possibility of us getting behind those fundraising efforts.
Right.
Yeah.
But in the context of I don't see us getting behind an effort of any building that if there's an accessibility component, but there's not an accessible approach, do we just say, well, you know, this will never be truly an accessible venue? So that may
I
be
mean,
a more
I think for right now,
Right.
we have to concentrate on what we have to
Right.
do.
right.
And I'm totally behind you, getting behind, if
Right.
they're gonna voluntarily want to change things, then absolutely, we should get behind it, but anyone else, we don't even need to think about this. We just need to think about this
Yeah,
report.
yeah, okay. I just wanted to throw it out there to get
Okay.
it on record, and I appreciate the Cisco Homestead and the Nipmuc Nation
Yeah.
efforts to really save this historic treasure. So, next meeting, Thursday, December 19th, 2019 at 7 is what we had agreed on in this room.
Yep.
And any other comments other than a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Seconded.
All those in favor, raise your hands, aye. All those opposed, declare the motion carried. The meeting is adjourned.